we see this as a project that can help do a number of things, but primarily it can help identify a number of carbon saving projects. So if you think of the area of the county, obviously there'll be subdivisions within that for each of your districts, and of course Blackburn and Blackpool added on as well. And for every low carbon project, we want to represent that in a sort of database, or on a map. It will look like a number of blobs. So all illustrative at this stage. But for every project, we really want to try and enable the impact from a carbon perspective of those projects, and we want to enable external funders and investors to understand what is needed to get a project off the ground, and you as local authorities can play a big part in facilitating that. So on the next slide, if you can move us on one more, please. Yeah, we've got some very generic, I guess, indicators there of what types of information we're hoping we can basically advertise and present as a means to attract funding and investment, and help you as a local authority bring and connect relevant stakeholders together on the topic of carbon. Yeah, I'll pass over to Kelly to do a bit more of a thorough run through of I guess what the project's all about. But hopefully it's kind of useful to have that sort of vision in your head before we talk to it in a bit more detail, because that's ultimately what we're looking to try and build for Lancashire. But yeah, Kelly, do you want to go through a bit more of the sort of underlying detail and drivers?
Yeah, thanks, Matt. I'm going to keep my video off because my Wi-Fi is struggling a little bit. But please shout if you can't hear me, or if I freeze or anything. So yeah, as Matt says, I'm going to go through a little bit of why authority-based insetting, or we often call it ABI, why ABI is important, kind of why how the idea sprang up, and a little bit more detail about what it actually is and how it works in practice. So a little bit of context as to where this idea came from. So firstly, you guys as local authorities, as I'm sure you're all aware, but just to build from, being responsible for all the public services in your area is activities that you have quite a lot of control in, but you have limited control in your wider areas and boroughs, which again, I'm sure you're aware of. But you do have lots of spheres of influence throughout your local area, and this is kind of what authority-based insetting is really trying to harness, is this influence among kind of the more wider areas that you have. So in terms of targets, many of you will have your own council target relating to your own operations. And this could be, yeah, so your estate, your fleet, and it could be net zero target or a carbon neutral target. And then many of you will also have targets related to the whole borough. A lot harder, limited influence, as we discussed. And regarding these targets, unlike the corporate sector, what we found is there's actually quite limited guidance for local authorities surrounding these targets, which has resulted in lots of councils all having quite different completely voluntary targets with various dates. So some are net zero, some are carbon neutral. And yeah, a variety of dates we can see here. So in the absence of this kind of best practice and guidance, it has led to a diverse range of local targets and strategies. So to meet these ambitious borough-wide targets, and given the small proportions of control, it's critical for councils to have strong partnerships with other organisations and citizens within their boroughs to tackle climate change. And this is where authority-based insetting really comes in. So the development of a local insetting scheme, we're hoping will have kind of two main drivers for a local authority. The first is to address the council's own target, and work as a carbon offset to reach council own targets of your own operations. And secondly, to be set up so that businesses can fund like local projects that are run in the wider area and drive decarbonisation in the wider borough, impacting and driving progress towards the area-wide target. And the main takeaway point is, yeah, council businesses partnerships will be critical for achieving both of these targets. And why is authority-based insetting needed? So we're really looking to respond to quite a few common needs. And the first one is a lack of local certified offsetting options. So reducing emissions is really hard, and many councils are now realising that they'll have residual emissions left for their own operational targets, which it can be unlikely that these won't be tackled just through nature-based offsets, depending on your geography. And spending taxpayer money outside the borough isn't a very attractive option to many councils. Secondly is private sector appetite to invest locally. So through our discussions with councils up and down the country, we've heard repeatedly that businesses have been wanting to invest locally, but there's often not been the projects kind of shovel ready and set up for them to do so. Thirdly is impact measurement needing to be improved. So with authority-based insetting, we're looking to create a more consistent way of reporting the impacts of these good projects that you're doing in your local areas, so that the information is reliable and comparable with other local authorities up and down the country. Fourth is new economic opportunities, which can be generated from a co-benefit perspective of all these projects. So job creation in the region, or citizens saving money because they have a better place to live in. And in addition, ABBY can be used to really connect organisations to collaborate together on projects. And we've seen some great examples of this, for example, in business parks. And fifth is innovation. Innovation is really key to scale action and creating ways to blend public and private finance. It isn't something that the world has necessarily cracked yet, but this is a really key goal of ours, is to bolster your public finance with local investment from businesses and organisations. So I'm going to go a little bit further into what ABBY actually is, how it works on a practical level. But first, I'm going to quickly go through the objectives just to ground us on what we're trying to achieve. So the first of these objectives is to better identify local carbon saving projects. And these projects can be a lot more diverse compared to typical offsetting projects, and it can be tailored to your local area's geography. Yeah, more nature-based potentially if you have more of that resource, or potentially more retrofitting if you're in a more urban area. And some example projects we've seen have been the installation of renewable energy sources, re-establishing peatland and forests, and the use of sustainable materials in building projects. Secondly is to bring new sources of funding to these projects. So as I'm sure you're aware, funding is limited, even for projects whose initial expense can be paid back. For example, retrofitted buildings with lower energy bills. So as I've mentioned, we're looking to expand the available funding of these projects with the future aim of using blended public and private finance. And finally, to enable better reporting of these projects. Before authority-based insetting, there was no real best practice on how to account for and publicise these good impacts. So we're looking to standardise that so they can be reported transparently and really publicised the good work that's being done. And the key theme underpinning all of these objectives is locality, and this is what distinguishes ABI from other similar schemes, such as offsetting. And I'm going to quickly go through how it differs from traditional offsetting. So we're not traditional offsetting, and your traditional framework is shown here in this diagram. It's where projects are conducted anywhere in the world, and projects that buy companies that buy their credits often have absolutely no connection at all to the projects or the people it's impacting. One step closer to ABI, but not quite, is insetting. It's quite a common practice, but less so than offsetting. But it has been implemented in several large global organizations. So insetting is where companies run carbon reduction projects within their own supply chain. So what is authority-based insetting? So we're taking the relevant principles of both offsetting and insetting and applying it to a local context where projects are implemented in the local authority area. And this makes authority-based insetting more transparent than offsetting, because you can nip down the road and see the project you funded, or you could overhear in the pub how someone's benefited, for example, from the house being retrofit. And ultimately, I like to equate this to local emissions, local reductions. So what have we done so far to make this concept a reality? In 2021, Anthesis developed a framework to document best practice for such a scheme, and this set the standard on how local authorities can use carbon reduction projects to both compensate for council residual emissions and accelerate decarbonisation in the wider area. And the best practice we developed has used many of the principles that underpin offsetting, which I'll just go through some of the key ones now. So we've created tests to make sure that all the projects a part of the scheme are additional. This is a really important if to sell offset credits, to make sure we don't fund a project that was going to happen anyway. Secondly is permanence. So we've also provided safeguards to choose projects that have a low risk of their carbon savings being reversed. For example, we wouldn't want to fund a tree planting project that's later felled for timber. And finally, verification. We've provided steps to verify projects, and this provides confidence that the carbon savings are accurate, haven't been double counted by different organisations, and that the carbon savings have actually happened. And alongside these principles, the framework also provides an overarching structure to operate such a scheme. So in comparison with traditional offsets, ABI offers some unique benefits, has lower administration costs, so you get more bang for your buck. You have less reliance on third-party specialists to verify and manage the schemes. Secondly is more efficient local collaboration. So it can be a really good gathering point for different organisations and businesses in the local area to come together to solve a common need. And we found some really good examples of this local collaboration actually really driving decarbonisation through this through the scheme. And finally is potential for payback. So this is definitely one for the future, but we're hoping that in future phases of ABI that we can get loans, for example, or green bonds to finance projects that can then pay back the investor. So for example, renewable energy projects would be a great starting point for this. And as I've mentioned, it can create a greater confidence and credibility because of its locality compared to existing offset schemes. And I'm just going to go through some examples of the digital project registry that we're developing. These aren't our actual platform. There are other platforms which are very similar. But they don't focus on carbon. Ours will looking to take the best parts of these project maps and project platforms that have the mechanism of quantifying and being able to trade in the carbon savings of these projects. And I'm gonna, I think, hand you over to Nat now, Matt, to go through some of our project outcomes.
Thanks, Kelly. Yeah, so specific to you guys, really, we wanted to actually talk to the scope of work that we put in to the Environment Agency, as Kate mentioned, to win the NERF bid. So NERF is the acronym for the Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund, a bit of a mouthful. But yeah, the scope of work that we put in, I'll run through now. And I think just to, if you move us on one slide, please, Kelly, the pool of participants is worth just making a note of. So on the who's involved point, we've obviously got the support of the Environment Agency. So there were 49 other projects in that last round, many of which were quite similar. So we'll be able to connect in with other authorities that are experimenting with similar ideas, which is great. And I guess combining everyone hopefully on this call, I'm sure there might be one or two not on the call, but I guess everyone in the county plus 2 unitaries plus a further 16 other authorities nationally, including one combined authority in the West Midlands, and a county, and a load of other really diverse boroughs and districts. There's 30 of us that we're working with, 30 of you, I should say, that we're working with. So there's hopefully some comfort in the sort of consensus that we can build and approach that we take. I guess then onto that scope of work. So what are we looking and have committed to the Environment Agency to deliver? The first is around testing the concept. So in quite a broad sense, and not just with local authorities, we really want to test this with local businesses, with third sector organisations, NGOs, wildlife trusts, and really anyone that we think this could be relevant to. We really want to try and have an open conversation and get some really good feedback. So there is a questionnaire that we'll come on to in a minute, but yeah, I think fundamentally this is still in a bit of an experimental phase, and your feedback will be really important in developing something that genuinely helps and is of value to you. So that's the first one. The second one, I guess, to push that a bit further, we want to identify further projects. And I say further because last year, during our sort of phase one that we're calling it, we did put through a dozen or so projects that were more illustrative. So we'll again point you to the right place to look at some of those in a second and talk to some examples. But really, we want to come away from this phase of work with some actual projects that you really are hoping to enable as local authorities, and we want to help you enable them. So getting the projects, it's a bit chicken and egg, I know, with having funding to be able to then have the time to properly identify projects, but we see, having projects on the table or in a sort of list, I suppose, is such an important first step, because then that really does open up a whole variety of avenues to match them off with funding from different sources. So even if they're just at early idea stage, coming out of this with ideas or really well defined, investable, shovel ready, as they say, projects is certainly a really important outcome for us. And maybe just to add, sorry, one final point in the scope, I think we have committed to identifying at least 5 for each of you, and that will naturally require a little bit of help, but there is a quantum on that. So again, quite a big multiplier there when you work that through across the whole county. We're really hoping to present back a load of really exciting project ideas. The third point then, building the legal and governance framework. That always sounds quite a sort of dry sounding point, but actually it's a really exciting point around ultimately how the funding could flow to these projects. Now we're seeing a number of examples up and down the country of councils that are managing environment funds or low carbon funds, such as some of the London boroughs. I think they have to have an offset fund for the money that they catch from property development. There are others, such as Oxford, that have sort of spun out a separate entity as a community interest company, with a view to basically spend the money quicker and direct it in a less sort of bureaucratic and more impactful way. So there's a whole range of ways of sort of organising yourselves ultimately to manage and deliver the funding. So there's a piece there that we'll be working with you on, and we've also partnered with a law firm to have in the background to help with some of the finer legal points on that. And then the final point after that is to actually make that sort of digital marketplace, that digital platform, a reality. And I'm sure our team of software developers can do much better than my slide I showed you at the start. But yeah, we've again got some really exciting projects going within Anthesis, such as our scatter tool. We sort of own and develop and manage that. So there's a load of really exciting design ideas that are currently already being worked through with our software team. Just a quick nod to the timeline. So I guess this meeting today really acts as our sort of a formal kickoff with you all, and we are hoping to do the majority of the work by the end of the financial year. I know there is a little bit of wiggle room within our bid application, Kate, just in case you panic slightly at that. But ultimately, I think, and based on our last year's experience, there is just a natural, I think, benefit in being able to feedback and publish the impact of this work to coincide with your financial year end, because ultimately that's what a lot of your other metrics will be driven by as well. So again, name of the game with this is about the impact that it can drive. So it makes sense to time that with your sort of year end reporting. I guess, yeah, it would be good to just make you aware for the other 16 authorities that I mentioned that we're working with already nationally. We are aiming to really push for a sort of year-end finish with a very similar exercise that we're performing with them. So there might be some precedent of what it looks like elsewhere to show you in January. But worth mentioning that, and I guess to be able to show you what our digital platform's looking like in January. And I guess similarly, as you might expect, once we've been able to test that and feedback what we've actually built, we are going to aim for a lot more profile nationally come March time. So there, I guess that's a sort of ask from you. I think it's worth just before we talk to a couple of examples, just taking a moment to explore your role again, and to, I guess, clarify the role of stakeholders more generally in this, because to put it in a hopefully a more sort of simple way, really, for how we see any stakeholder, councils being one, in interacting with this, we see it in two ways really. One way is going to be as a project developer. So taking you as a council, there are going to be hopefully a number of projects that you as the project owner are really trying to get off the ground. So whether that's on your own buildings, on your fleet, on your own land, there is hopefully a big wish list of projects that you as a developer are looking to enable. That definitely ticks the box as being relevant to this, because again, I'm sure you won't be able to fund them all at present, at least, and could probably do with some help on certain projects. Widening it out a bit, there could be projects in the wider borough as well, and great if they are in the wider borough. That also ticks a big part of our sort of objectives there around that wider borough decarb. I guess it's not just yourselves that are going to fit that category. We are looking to, as I said earlier, third sector organisations, local businesses, I imagine, and hopefully the more sort of aware and mature businesses in terms of climate change. They're also going to have a big wish list of projects that they're wanting help with. So again, there's hopefully just going to be a lot of projects that are are sort of defined and ready, and organisations are willing to advertise them with a view to urgently get them off the ground. On the other side, as you may well sense this coming, so if you're not a developer, and you can be both, I should add, but in addition to a developer, I should say, you've got the project funder. So again, you as a council could actually also be a funder. So we've had some really interesting chats with our existing 16 nationally, where they might already have an environment fund, but they would love to be able to make that money go a bit further, and actually, rather than funding projects in their entirety, they might be able to provide a sort of top up, or that kind of marginal amount of funding just to tip a project into being viable, or to change a project from being a carbon sort of not neutral, is the better word, like a project without a significant carbon impact, to one that really does save a lot of carbon. So that there's also that ability to sort of blend funding, and I suppose, make your own funding go further by directing it to projects that might be supplemented by other sources. Again, it pulls in the private sector, so it could be larger corporates that currently have a CSR budget or are looking to spend money. It could be your supply chain that are looking to invest as part of their social value, and it could be larger financial institutions, as Kelly mentioned, some of the green bond providers, and larger banks and financial services sector. So there's a big long list of potential funders, but again, going back to that chicken and egg, you need the projects defined to be able to match the funding. So it's really exciting areas to explore there, in addition to just yourselves acting in both of those roles, which is certainly something that we're going to be looking to do. Okay, so sorry, we're nearly finished talking, because we would love to get some questions and comments and feedback from you all, but perhaps Kelly, I don't know if you're happy talking to these, or if I should carry on rattling through. I think we've got just two example case studies that are quite short and sweet, but would you like me to talk to these, Kelly?
Yes, please, if that's okay.
Not a problem. No, having some Wi-Fi challenges. Okay, so really quickly, and this also just signposts some of our resources. On our website, you'll be able to download last year's full report and all of the case studies, so you'll be able to look at these in a bit more detail. So there's a bit of a route to download them there from the following link. But essentially, if you move us on one more, we did do, I think it was 13 examples last year, and you'll see there that they do cover all your sort of traditional sectors, as they're often defined in climate change action plans, and they're also across 3 different types, so avoidance, reduction, and removal. So they might all sound very similar, but I guess they are not, and they all can have different implications when it comes to your reporting and your claims that you may or may not want to make. But the key thing to take there is just how diverse, and again, as part of this experiment, we're really keen to open this up to allow for, I guess, the more diverse the better, really, if it is a net sort of good project and a net saving project. Then at this stage, we're really keen to try the mechanism with all types of projects. It probably is worth mentioning, due to our Environment Agency funding, we do have to have a significant proportion of nature-based projects. So part of one of the terms of our funding is that it includes nature-based projects, but it's certainly not just limited to those. So if there are other more energy-related projects that you wanted to put forward, then that's fine. But we do need to have a bit of focus on the nature-based stuff as part of our grant terms. We've got on the next slide, I think I put in the definitions of those 3 types of projects. I won't dwell on this too long for right now, but for those that are less familiar, we've attempted to give some examples there of avoidance, reduction, and removal. So please do have a look at that once we've circulated the slides, which we will look to do after the session today. And then the two examples. The first on the next slide was, I think, e-cargo bike. for a borough or two boroughs in London, Richmond and Wandsworth. And again, using my example at the start, on the next slide, we were able to actually quantify the emissions. We were able to look at the funding that those the e-cargo bikes, or a number of them, actually cost, and we were able to give an illustration of how it could be advertised and what the funder would get in return for their funding. So again, might seem like quite a small scale project, but the sort of power of being able to aggregate that across a whole borough or across a number of boroughs, we feel is quite exciting. The next project, again, it was another avoidance one, but a really nice example of where, when I talked about, taking a project from one that doesn't necessarily save that much carbon to a higher saving project, was in West Sussex, where they looked at a passive house new build, and they were able to have the funding to build it to building regulation standards, but really like the idea of offering that sort of marginal cost that it would require to build it to passive house standards. And again, there's a measurable, demonstrable saving attached to doing that. But yeah, they didn't have the funding themselves, so really like the idea of being able to advertise that out to a local investor. So yeah, and apologies, Gwen, we didn't include the Blackburn example, which I probably should have done given the audience. But yeah, you will see a really exciting example from Blackburn with Darwin that we also included in that round. So please do have a look. So final recap of next steps. I mentioned that we're looking to get feedback. We can send you the links to a survey. We can send you a link to upload any project ideas if you have them to hand, but rest assured, I think we do anticipate needing to actually have more focused discussion with all of you individually over the next few months. So again, happy to do that following a more sort of district focused chat if you'd prefer. And if we do run out of time in the remaining 20 minutes now for any questions, then again, feel free to just ping us an email. We'll make sure our contact details are right there as well for you to get your head around everything that we have just talked to. So I will be quiet. You've probably heard enough of my voice now. But yeah, it'd be great to pause for questions and comments. I can see a couple of hands up. So happy to go to questions.
I think Scott is first.
Brilliant. Okay, yeah, go for it, Scott.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Matt. So been on the fringes of this for a while. It really seems to have evolved as an idea. I think in terms of the system that you're presenting, the package, everything, it's you've thought of everything. So I'm really quite impressed with that. It's got a little bit of everything. My one question, I suppose, is on the funders model. And you obviously mentioned it's a bit of a chicken and egg, get the projects in and get the funders in potentially. I suppose there's probably about a few different questions, but I suppose the main one is, what effort do you see there needing to be to promote this platform and our projects specifically in Lancashire to funders in terms of the staffing resource, the promotional package, building the relationship with the kinds of companies who are going to be and the investment funds that are going to be looking to invest in this? Because I think really you've got the local authorities around the table. Clearly, there's a lot of buy-in. That's the bit of the buy-in that we haven't heard too much about today. And I'm not saying you'd expect to have that by now, but what I would like a little bit of is the plan to get to that point, whether it's build up the projects and the list first and then do question mark with that audience to sort of bring those in. I suppose that's the main question that I've got. There's other questions around well, just one more question from me. It's about the scope of the funders and how the money actually gets to local projects. Is it direct to projects that the funders pick, or is it a pool of projects within a given local authority area that would almost be the funding would be distributed between. There's just a mechanism question there, which I guess also links to the accountability and the actual carbon savings that are being achieved.
Sure. Thanks, Scott. So yeah, two really good questions, and I think but both really for me are linked to that governance strand of the work. Recognizing that, as I suppose you're alluding to, it's great being able to graft for these pilot projects, which is essentially which is largely there's a bit of funding, but it is going to require a lot of goodwill and I suppose effort to get these as a sort of one-off push. But yeah, for longer term, within that governance strand of the work, we believe that there's a model that could sort of sustain this, and we're seeing that with how other environment funds are being run. So by no means one size fits all, and by no means is there just one provider in all of this as well. But we're seeing a number of funds that would be able to take a proportion of money in and money out to cover their management costs. So that's one model that I guess would allow a local authority, without a whole team of employees kicking about with capacity. It's a model that can kind of fund itself from the project funding. Now again, there's efficiencies at what level do you do that? Do you do that at a borough level, a district level, or do you do that at a county, or does it operate at a kind of centralised level? All of those questions we're looking to try and give some clarity on, but I think there's definitely a few models there in terms of the actual admin and operation that we want to be able to come back with a version that doesn't require you as a borough to have to go out and hire a whole team and incur a load of extra time and costs to do, because otherwise it will never work. Only other thing I would say is in terms of the promotion piece, again, we're hoping that by moving en masse, that will help with some of that effort, where it is a national thing, or if it is a county-wide thing, that will certainly increase your odds of local businesses getting to know it and accept it and use it ultimately. So there is that power in numbers as well from a promotion of the fund. To your second point, on the scope of the funders, at the moment we've actually suggested in our phase 1 last year that projects are funded on a sort of case-by-case basis. So if there was a large corporate that really wanted to do a project in the social housing sector, or for whatever reason that aligned with their objectives, then we really like the idea of being able to be really clear and ensure that money is only allocated to that project. It also really helps with the additionality evidence as well, and proving that if it is a project by project, then that's really defendable, that without that investor's money a certain project wouldn't have happened. In terms of that kind of blended model, again, there are examples of funds doing that, and that will really ultimately come back to the sort of governance and the terms by which the decision makers of the fund want to operate against. But from our perspective, we like the idea of it being on a project by project basis, because you'll be able to have a lot more confidence in the enablement and the impact and the additionality.
I think just to very quickly come back, just in terms of the link to business, I think the thing that we're probably most desperate for in all of this is that introduction to bodies with funding who could invest in Blackpool, because what I'm really conscious of, and a lot of local authorities around the table will be in a similar position, I don't expect our businesses to be in the vanguard of looking for low carbon projects. I expect actually blue chip companies who are really on board with the sustainability agenda to be the ones we're trying to connect with. So the big thing for me with this project, reiterating what I said earlier, is the bridge and the expertise to know where to go and who to speak to, and the networking that's required to go to them and say, hey, there's a bunch of projects in Lancashire you might want to have a look at. And so that, if it's part of the governance work, is just going to be a really crucial element for us, I think.
Great, thanks. Again, super interesting, and we're I guess learning a lot in terms of that type of investor as well, and how they so some of the bigger financial institutions, there seems to be again, which is surprising when you hear, but a lot of not just appetite and interest and all those buzzwords, but they've got actual funding to go and identify projects. So they really are struggling to identify them, and being able to help connect. We're getting more and more feedback each week that there is a whole market there really that we can connect, and we're sort of getting more excited by that by the week, that they're looking to find those linkages too. Brilliant. Okay, I think, was it Paul up next?
I think it is Paul, but I was just going to say, Kate, do you have your hand up? Was that about this question, or is it separate?
Just a bit on that actually. Yeah, no, thanks, Kelly. Sorry, Paul. No, I was just going to say that obviously there are other funds, a Greater Manchester Environment Fund, but they kind of work very much on a philanthropic basis. So a firm might look at their Scope 3 emissions, for example, and go, right, I'm not going to be able to get rid of those, so I'm going to offset them. And what's a local project that I can work with on that? And at the moment, there's no kind of rigor behind that, so there's no emphasis on the business itself who wants to buy any kind of a carbon offset to actually have gone through some kind of process. And I think when I was doing the research around what this might mean for particular projects, looking at in the context of chipping and low carbon heat and the kind of carbon offsets you get from taking a whole village off oil, which is a considerable amount of carbon reduction, it just felt like it's a bit of a Wild West. And certainly talking to people from Wildlife Trust, apparently there's big tracts of land being bought up that aren't being peatland, peatland's not being restored because people are waiting for the peatland restoration credits to have more value. So it's kind of like an emerging market. And I think that has massively unintended consequences, which would be hugely detrimental. So, what Matt and the team are doing at Anthesis helps to give a framework and a structure to something that otherwise you think, well, that just could be some kind of monster. So yeah, that's a bit of background there. Thanks, Kelly.
No worries. So yeah, Paul.
Yeah, thanks. No, that's really interesting. So a couple of points and maybe a question. So in your presentation, you mentioned, or on the slides, it said about Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, but you didn't have anything around Scope 3 emissions on it. Just picking up Scott's point and this discussion around the sort of whether individual projects that are sponsored or whether it's like a group stuff. I think there might, particularly if I'm thinking in the highway sector, which myself and Stuart are part of, there might be a tendency for organisations to want pretty projects that show that they're green, rather than, we can have a substantial saving maybe on the highway network from the things that we're doing, but the picture of a road on your toilet roll packet isn't quite the same as a picture of a wildflower on your toilet roll packet, is it? So there might be maybe a bit of scope for a mix of the types of mechanisms that you just talked about. So definitely would welcome a conversation, further conversation, and if we can somehow get that penciled in, then that would be good. I think that was me. Stuart, did you have anything on the highway side you wanted to add?
It was mainly around active travel schemes. It was very pertinent where you slide about avoidance, reduction, removal. I mean, certainly materials designed for active travel schemes, we can pretty much avoid them now and get to what's called theoretical net zero, with carbon negative aggregates and low carbon binders. Then it was more about then leveraging in what would be perceived to be your operational production, so taking cars off the road. So maybe there's an opportunity for schemes that maybe didn't previously pass, in inverted commas, a BCR, to then pick them up off the shelf and use this to fund them, maybe. I don't know. It was just a thought.
Brilliant. Thanks both. And Paul, just to come back on with one sort of clarification there on the Scope 1, 2 and 3, the ultimate sort of boundary, I guess, to apply to this will be the borough-wide boundary. So there's no real I guess limits or barriers on including Scope 3 at all. On the contrary, I think there's going to be a lot of scope, your council Scope 3 that will obviously be in the borough. So that's really the ultimate filter to apply, and it's how we'll ultimately measure the success of this as a scheme. It's looking at that borough-wide total and whether that goes up or down, knowing that any individual accounts and reporting are very unlikely to reconcile to that borough-wide total. So think of it as that widest layer of the onion that Kelly presented on. Brilliant. Okay. And then who's up next?
Matt Evans is next.
Yeah. Hi there.
Hi, Matt.
It's a really great presentation, and I kind of like the acting locally aspect of it. The only maybe concern I have is if you look at the international sort of carbon offset market, it does have a history of being, let's say kindly, overly optimistic in what you get for your money, which has led to things like VCS and gold standard certificates. So I was just wondering if there's any third-party assurance scheme that will be a part of this, so potential funders know they're getting what they're paying for.
Yeah. So there's a whole we've done a whole sort of comparison against current offsetting by provider and all the nuances there, and I think a couple of things to really highlight. One of the things that will make this, we feel, more credible is actually going to be that carbon is likely to be a lot more expensive when it's local. So when you're taking an actual project that you can go and understand and go and sort of see or touch, the price per ton saved is going to likely be higher. And there's a lot more transparency around the workings that is going to be all held on our registry. So compared to a lot of the offsetting providers, it's all going to be a lot more transparent in terms of the method and why the savings are what they are, which a lot of current offsetting projects don't or aren't historically great at publishing the workings. But in terms of the verification, again, we would anticipate that a lot of the projects are going to be suitably low risk if they're local. Obviously, it's very different if the project is the other side of the world and you've got no idea if it's started or if it's going to start or if it's already saving carbon. So part of the mechanism we're designing manages that risk by virtue of the fact that it's local, and there will be a lot of self verification and third party being the council or the developer. If they feel the risk is so great that they need to appoint a third party verifier, then it allows for that as well. But the verification chunk, I'd definitely recommend you have a read through of in our report, because it kind of starts by comparing the risk really of this compared to offsetting, and they are two very different risk profiles, and acknowledging that this really has to be practical for you as authorities to kind of administer. It really has to be quite practical and balance that risk accordingly.
Okay, thanks. I'll have a read. Cheers.
Brilliant, thanks.
Great, and Gillian is next.
Thank you. I've just got a couple of questions. So the first is around, are you doing anything around making sure that the corporations who are investing in the local areas, are you interested in making sure that they have invested in reducing their own operations first? So then this is like their residual emissions that they're then trying to offset. And the second part of it is I went to a similar presentation a few weeks ago from a different organisation, and they were essentially looking at councils being able to get investment in, say, social housing retrofit. And we got to determine how many years we sold those credits for. And then when it came to our internal council target, if they included those housing emissions, we could stop selling them at that point where we had to reach our target. So essentially then we scooped up those emissions and we could say, show that reduction. Would this allow us to consider any of those aspects as well? Thanks.
Sure. Yeah. So just on the first point, I think recognizing that, yeah, there needs to be that hierarchy for authorities to make sure they've addressed their own before they look elsewhere. So that was actually something that we had fed back earlier on this year to strengthen our guidance on, to make sure that it didn't support, I guess, a lot of businesses neglecting their own or picking a more sort of convenient way out of actually addressing their own. So yeah, that we're going to tighten up in our framework a lot more, but is certainly the intention. I think just also worth mentioning, when it comes to those organisations that are seeing this as a last resort, there could still be a lot of organisations that are going down the more CSR philanthropic route. So they might just be wanting to make a donation or contribution, so it's not actually swept up in their carbon performance and their carbon targets. It might just be a separate activity. So we're seeing a diverse mixture of those organisations that are seeing it part of their carbon target versus those that are just doing it because they want to do a more philanthropic activity locally. So then, the second point, really interested to maybe offline understand a bit more about the other provider. I think, Gwen, you might have kindly sent us a link to the provider you're talking about. But yeah, I guess ultimately, with it sounds like you're describing what claims can and cannot be made, and also it sounds like you're describing how much freedom there is to trade the carbon. And I think, both of those we are sort of we have addressed in our last year's work, but are currently in the process of making some updates to the claims part, where ultimately, local authorities, the working group we've got all voted to say that they were comfortable with any authority-based insets being used towards their own organisational target. So that was a sort of clarification that was made earlier in the year. But in terms of the trading, I think I'm a little bit more cautious on sort of saying yes, it could do what you're describing, because actually the moment that the carbon starts being traded, that's when it can be subject to more criticism over how additional it is. We're working on the basis with this that anything before the project happens is fine to allocate the savings or the ownership, but once the project has actually happened, that needs to then be fixed. And the project, if it's off the ground, it's happened, and it'll be very hard for anyone else to claim that they've enabled anything additional. So again, probably one to maybe follow up on, or I can point you to the right points in our guidance. But hopefully that helps. And really interested to maybe explore that other example a little bit more. Great stuff.
I think we're at time. There's just one more hand that's popped up from Sammy.
Quick one. And
Sorry,
Sammy,
I always do this right at the end.
I
was just going to ask quickly whether, just on the terms of like managing the whole process, so like if there's an external project in the wider borough and they're like, oh, we're interested, we want to join in, is it up to us? Do they come to us as a local authority and then we sort of manage the system to work out carbon benefits and things, or is that all done by your end? I'm just thinking staff time, that sort of thing.
Yeah, certainly for this project, definitely refer them on to us. We're here to help and support and take a lot of that legwork off of you, certainly. So yes, to helping. And I think beyond sort of March next year, hopefully by then there'll be some options for how to sustain it longer term, that again doesn't put too much burden on yourselves. Basically in most cases, if in doubt, point them towards us or through Kate, and we can certainly help as much as we can.
Okay, thank you.
Brilliant. Okay, well, thanks ever so much, everyone. We'll send through some follow-up details, and as I said, it'd be great if you can help arrange a quick follow-up chat with us, and have a look at some of the questionnaire, survey materials and resources as well. But really appreciate everyone's time.
Thanks, Kelly. Thanks, Matt. Really appreciate you coming and explaining it all to us as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Not at all. Thank you.
See you soon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.
Cheers. Bye.
Thanks.